Welcome to Seeking the Sacred Self. I'm your host, Naomi Rozak. Before we start with today's topic of needs, if this podcast is meeting some of your needs around learning or growth or healing, would you remember to like, subscribe, rate, or review it? This helps it to reach other people who are interested in the same topics, and I'd be so grateful. Our topic today is, what do you need? Do you know what a need is? Do you know that you have needs? Do you acknowledge that your needs deserve to be met? Or do you live life thinking that everyone else matters more than you and you need to take care of everyone else's needs? Needs are the driver for everything in you and everyone around you. Knowing what you need can change your life for the better, so it's worth investing some time to learn about them. So what are needs? Oxford Languages Dictionary defines needs as circumstances in which something is necessary or that require some course of action. Necessity. For example, the human need for food. A need is a thing that is wanted or required. For example, that I need some money. Needs are a vital part of you. They are how you function. They are what motivate you to act this way or that way. They are the underlying intention under behavior, whether you're aware of them or not. Everything you do is in relationship to what you need. This includes behaviors that you struggle with and behaviors you feel good about. All of these behaviors are in service of what you need on a deep level. Needs can be met by you or by people in relationship with you. Sometimes they can be met by complete strangers or a random piece of knowledge you come across or something in your environment. Needs also fit into different categories. Some needs contribute to our physical well-being, like the needs for water, food, or exercise. And some needs meet and fill up other areas of our life, like connection and love and belonging, or finding meaning and purpose, because those are legitimate needs too. At the end of this episode, I'll share a comprehensive list of needs to see if you relate to any of them. Some needs are static and fairly constant. You will always need food, water, sleep. We pretty much always need some kind of love or connection, even if what that looks like is different from what it looks like for other people. And some needs change over time as we move through stages of life. When we are little kids, it may be those physical needs, food, water, etc. And then this need to be emotionally connected and guided. There's a huge need for the presence of our caregivers or parents, as we have no other help at that time of life. And when we are teenagers, we may be very focused on our needs for love, for information, for adventure, for meaning, or for belonging. And if we're adults with young children, we may be more focused on needs for support from others, for sleep or rest, or for partnership. And when we are ill or grieving or going through a transition time, needs can flip very quickly from one to the next. There's a famous model of how we give and receive love, the love languages model. And while I think there can be a core love language people have, maybe for words of affirmation or for physical touch, I think those things are very much based on what our biggest need is at the time. For example, while words of affirmation are very meaningful to me, quality time is also a big one. But when I had little kids and was drained and tired and touched out and felt exhausted and unseen so much of the time, acts of service felt incredibly loving to me when my husband would clean the house unexpectedly or take over the childcare for a while. That was how I felt loved at the time. So I think our needs really drive how we give and take in relationships and how loved we feel. And if we do have one core consistent love language, I think that can also be driven by needs. because our needs are very much influenced by our life experiences. First, there are basic human needs, as I've mentioned. There are the needs for food and water, and these are universal. But we all have emotional needs as well. We need to feel seen and heard and loved and accepted. This is also universal human need. But what we find, what can differ from one person to another, is that each of us have core needs, single ones that stand out more than others, and usually an emotional need. And this doesn't mean that if my core need is to be seen, that the next person doesn't need to be seen. If that's not their core need, all human beings have a need to be seen. But for some of us, this will feel like a deep emptiness inside, this almost a need that feels like it can never be filled. And then that becomes our core driving need. And these have become core needs usually because of a tragic something in childhood that happened. A traumatic experience or a home environment that didn't meet certain needs. Alternately, a home environment that directly injected harm and difficulty into our little spirits and bodies. What happens is the need goes unmet for a long time, and then it shows up later in life as a trigger, something that brings up big feelings in our body when somebody ignores or does the opposite of what we need. Perhaps we already feel difficulty in that area, and then somebody stomps directly on that emptiness or that pain. I've already shared in other episodes that one of my trauma pieces has been that I silenced myself after my parents' divorce. I emotionally shut down. I made myself small, and I stopped talking about what was happening inside me. I stopped even feeling what was going on inside, so I couldn't have talked about it even if I wanted to, because I didn't know, I wasn't self-aware. So when I became an adult, particularly as I had children and began to feel overloaded, and when I started to lose my functionality, I couldn't get through a day very well the way I used to. The ceaseless demands of parenthood reactivated all these old triggers. The fact that kids talk all the time, but a mom doesn't usually get to share much about what she's going through and what she thinks or feels. The only talking she does is to guide her children or to connect with her children. And some of my most reactive moments would be when I was giving instructions to my little kids. Often when we've come in from an exhausting day out and I'm depleted, they're depleted, and I'm just trying to get everyone settled so I can calm myself down a little bit, you know? Um, and then one of them would interrupt me, or both of them, a few times in a row, and I would just explode because there was this raw place inside of me that had never been heard, like never been listened to. And it was like a gaping hole of pain inside. I needed to be heard. So when I didn't know where that need came from and hadn't healed any of the pain, the wound was unmet, and that raw need would take a hold of me, and I didn't have control over the explosiveness of that reaction. So our core needs, the central one that drives our behavior and emotions the most, is related to a core wound, a continually unmet need and unhealed pain. The beautiful thing can be that even without directly going back to the painful event whenever it happened and trying to heal it, if we can be in relationship with people who see that wound in us and that need and are willing to gently be with us and help to meet that need, we can start to heal and we won't feel out of control in it any longer. As we meet the needs, sometimes we can even go further to start healing that original pain, and our needs will shift again into something else. These days, I don't need to be listened to or heard as much for a few reasons. I have some really stellar people in my life who listen to me well. On top of that, I listen to my own self, my own needs. And thirdly, I get to say what I need. I get to tell what's going on inside of me all the time now. There were a lot of years where I felt so isolated by myself and with my voice trapped inside of my body. And so while my healing work with myself is by no means done with, so much of that original core wound is healed and so much of that need is met on a consistent basis. So it doesn't have this big energy in my body anymore, this big drive, and it doesn't come out explosively. And what that means when my core need is met, my attention can go to some higher level needs. What I want to introduce here is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was created by psychologist Abraham Maslow. It is, if you can picture, a triangle in which the broad base of the triangle represents our more basic needs, which are physiological. These are for food, shelter, water, air. And if you don't have the air you need or the water you need, you're not going to be able to do much else with your life. You can't focus on anything else because you'll be searching to have those basic things. You will be physically driven to get those needs met. When that level of need is met, a person feels physiologically satisfied and can then start to pay attention to the next level of needs, which are those of safety, security. Do you have enough income? Do you have routine? Do you have order in your life? Do you have the resources to take care of yourself? If those needs are met, the person can progress into relational needs, those for intimacy and belonging, into connection with other people. And after that, there are the needs of esteem, which to me very much speak of how we relate to ourselves and how we figure out what achievement means to us and whether we're respected by other people as examples. And at the very top of the triangle is self-actualization, which is a really big word for now that everything feels good in and around me, what can I pour myself into? How can I express what's inside of me? How do I make meaning of my life? How can I be creative? How can I find purpose? And sure, we can kind of blend the top few layers or levels. We can address different parts of those simultaneously, and we dance around the pyramid of needs a little bit, but we will struggle if those underlying basic needs aren't met because it's really hard to be an artist when you don't have food, or to launch a new business that fills you with purpose when you feel alone and don't have a network to support you as you get started and as maybe things don't take off as quickly as you want to. If you're like me, this model made so much sense. It explains how there are times in life when you can't think about friendships or relationships or sex or going out and having fun because you don't know if you'll have money to make the next month's rent or mortgage payment. And that need to have the money to take care of your basic shelter is felt in tension all the way through your body. You cannot focus on anything else. But if your needs for housing and payments and all of that is taken care of, thinking about art and service and philanthropy and philosophy and all these other things can come so much easier. This is where I'm saying that our relationship with needs and the kind of needs we have is 100% related to both where we are in our life right now and what has happened to us in our formative years as a child, a teenager, a young adult. And we will actually be controlled by our needs. They will be controlling our inner feelings and they will be driving us to do this or that, especially if they are needs that have been unmet for a long time and if we don't have self-awareness in them. Self-awareness, when we slowly start to become aware of our behavior and feelings and what drives them, is what helps us to decipher why we're behaving the way we do. So an important thing to address is that all our behaviors and feelings are in service of our needs. And a need is not a tiny little inkling of something we might want or that could potentially be good for us. A need is required. It's necessity. It's a need. So let's stop putting them to the side and paying them no attention. Let's treat them like they matter. The energy of a need is what is trying to build a life that feels better for you nearly every minute of the day. So to be out of touch with our needs is to be out of touch with the very things that can shift your life into something that feels better. Needs are important. We judge ourselves when we do something out of character or behave in a way that others judge or behave in a way that we don't like ourselves. Like we say to ourselves, "You're so weird. No one will love you because you act like a freak." When really, you just have a need to express yourself authentically or to be seen as worthy or even to be noticed by people. Or maybe we don't parent the way we think we should. We think a good parent wouldn't do this. We look at the times that we explode with anger or try to control something about our kids or shut them down in the middle of them having a tough moment, and we think, I'm so awful. I hate myself. What a terrible person I am. What an awful parent. My kids must hate me. And we don't realize that what's driving that behavior that we don't like is a part of us that needs something. It needs more quiet. It needs less overload. It needs to be seen or heard, or it needs more order or help or appreciation. But the need is not for you to judge yourself. That will only make the behavior and the feelings worse, and it will build a wall between you and your ability to be aware of the need that's driving that behavior. But if you can treat the uncomfortable feelings and the needs like friends who are trying to tell you something, maybe you can start to become more aware of it. That need, that core wound. Maybe you can start to heal it. Maybe the next time the kids are in your face, stomping all over that need, you notice the feeling isn't quite as big anymore. And you actually have a minute where you can kind of calm yourself before you have to say something. Maybe you can give yourself a bit of grace. And the part of you that never felt seen or heard will absorb that little bit of grace and feel just a little more loved, more calm. So let's talk about you for a minute and the questions we asked at the beginning of the episode. Do you know what you need? Do you even have time and space in your life or permission to find out? How many needs are you taking care of for others and don't have the slightest clue about your own? And do others matter more than you? Is that really true? Maybe you need so much that you are completely overwhelmed by the thought of even where to start. Or do you have behaviors and feelings that are so frustrating to you because it's not who you want to be, but you're afraid this is who you really are? What if under those behaviors is just a need? But then how do we know what our needs are? There is one primary way we notice what we need, and that's through feelings. And before I go into that, the top layer that comes over top of feelings is our behavior. So if you're not comfortable yet or practiced at feeling your feelings, start with your behaviors. Because wherever you're behaving in a way that doesn't feel good or appropriate to your soul, your heart, to some sense of yourself that is like, I think that's hurting people. I don't want to be that way. That's the beginning layer for you, is to look at the behavior and instead of judging it, start to feel a little bit underneath it and ask yourself, what might I be feeling that's driving that behavior? What did I feel in the moments before I exploded or before I raged or before I ran away? Whatever it is, and feel backwards as far as it is. Like, what was I feeling 10 minutes before? What was I feeling when I woke up that morning? What had I been feeling all week long? And as you get to that, you'll begin to find where the root of the matter is. And this just takes some practice. You will not get all these answers in a night, but as you practice them and deepen the level of self-awareness, you're going to start putting pieces of the puzzle together and begin to heal kind of what's at the root of all of this. So behaviors aside, the layer underneath behaviors is feelings. And feelings are known by body sensations, by emotions in your body. Examples might be a sensation of like hot burning something up your back, and you identify it as anger, or fear is a knot in the pit of your stomach, or anxiety is pressure, it's a pinching, it's a tightness across your chest. So just notice the actual physical sensations of these things. Feelings are prompts to look inward to find out what our needs are. Feelings have a purpose. They are not random. They are information pointing to something. And that information might be that there is a need that is either met or not met. So the need might be really simple. Like if the feeling is sadness, sometimes all sadness is asking for is, can you sit with me for a minute? Can we just feel this sadness? And that's all the need is. The feeling wants to be felt or witnessed by you. Other times, underneath that feeling, the need is more specific. It's a need that asks us to take action, to communicate it to someone, to ask for help or set a boundary as examples. So first we feel into our feelings. We notice the feeling in our body. We pay attention to where in the body we're feeling it. As I mentioned, the physical sensations of it. And then we sense into what that feeling might be, and we try to name it. This burning I'm feeling, I think that might be anger. This feeling of wanting to cry, I think that's sadness. This feeling of not being able to breathe, I feel really afraid. Sometimes the feeling is uncomfortable and we don't really want to feel it. Sometimes it's a feeling we're used to and we know what it is right away. Regardless, the feeling is there to help us. Feelings are just honest friends sharing a message with us, even though they can be really big and have a lot of energy to them that scares us sometimes. But they are a very legitimate pathway to our needs, because the feelings that we call negative feelings are the ones we experience when needs are not being met. These are feelings like anger, fear, sadness, feeling fragile, confused, embarrassed, disgusted, enraged, heartbroken, jealous, and more. And then when our needs are met, we experience the more uplifting feelings, the ones we call positive feelings, which again are just the same kind of honest friends reflecting back to us that our needs are met. They are being satisfied. Feelings like being amazed, empowered, safe, confident, calm, engaged, loving, happy, trusting, or grateful. So just take a moment and think about the types of feelings that show up a lot in your life and what they might be pointing to. How many needs are being met and how many aren't? But then when we talk about feelings and needs, there has to be a recognition that there's something to be done. In some cases, awareness is all we need, but in many cases, something more needs to happen for those needs to be met. And sometimes that thing is communication. This can be really difficult, and we need to talk about why it's so hard to ask for what we need. So I have a simple question. How much attention did someone pay to your needs when you were younger, when you were a child, a teenager? How much were you listened to when you tried to say that the way the home was running or the way you were being treated or how you weren't being listened to was hard for you? Or maybe you never said anything. Maybe you saw by the way your home and your family functioned that there was simply no space for you to have needs or to express them. Maybe no one else around you paid any attention to their needs. Perhaps all you've ever seen is people consumed with the busyness or their own lives, mothers who never think about themselves, grim fathers who didn't know how to be happy. In a way, people wrestling for their own needs to be met, but not knowing what their needs were, or never communicating in an honest or emotionally thoughtful way. Or maybe childhood was good, but as you grew older, some relationship showed you that you couldn't have any needs at all, and you were rejected or put down, even physically or otherwise harmed, if you dared to say that something wasn't working for you, something was not turning out the way you'd hoped for, or you needed something different. And here I can't help but think of all the people trapped in long-term abusive marriages and how over so many years, the cage around you, the emotional, physical, whatever it was, cage around you got tighter and tighter and tighter. And there was simply no room for these people to take an emotional breath, for them to even be aware of themselves, because the state of violence around them meant that they had to be aware of the other person all the time for their own safety and survival. So if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we go back to that base level. When you're in a marriage like that, you're looking at survival. You're just trying to keep your body going and somehow get through this tough circumstance. A war would be the same way. In war, you're not thinking thoughts of philosophy, most likely. You're thinking of survival day to day. And so I just have to acknowledge that even while I'm talking about these things, I'm aware that there can be such strenuous circumstances that even to have awareness of needs beyond basic physiological survival is a privileged position. And that it's no wonder that when you get out of that strenuous circumstance, it might take a really long time to recover and to be able to work down to the level of what you as a person in your own right needs. So just be aware of that. If you're somebody who's come out of something like that, give yourself a whole bunch of love and grace, and just let yourself ease forward in your own process of life and healing, taking one step at a time. And can we talk for a second about how vulnerable it is to turn to someone and say, I need, to ask another human being if they will see and hear what you have to say and the empty spot in you where that need is. And you are asking another person to care about you enough to help you fill that empty spot in that moment. That is so vulnerable. You can't do that if you're sure that only you should take care of you, or no one cares about you, or you have to keep some kind of emotionally protective armor up. Having needs is vulnerable. And we often feel more comfortable addressing physical needs for clothing or money or food, or logistical needs like schedule changes, than we do saying something like, I need to feel loved, or I'm really scared. I need you to hold me, or I don't feel fulfilled. I need room to be able to pursue that and figure it out. And just hope that whoever you're talking to cares enough and has mental and emotional capacity enough to see you and help you meet that need. So communicating needs can be scary, especially if you haven't had practice, if you've never had someone pay attention to your needs, to hear you and help you meet those needs. But I'll share a simple formula. This is also part of the nonviolent communication model, which is created by Marshall Rosenberg, a lovely, lovely man who just realized we have so much need to learn how to speak to and see and understand each other, and created resources to help people with this. The nonviolent communication model says that we can express what we feel and need with the intention to increase connection with the other person and without harming other people, which means we keep accusations and criticisms and laundry lists of past wrongs out of it, and we just talk about ourselves, what we feel, what we need, so that the other person is able to hear us more clearly, and there's less chance of activating their own defensiveness or triggers. So for a simple need, one that isn't triggered by someone else's behavior, you might simply ask, If it's in my school carpooling group, I might message and say, hey, I have an appointment on this day. I need someone else to do school pickup. Is someone able to do that? I need someone to fill in that gap. And quite often somebody's willing to do it. And if they're not, they get to say that it doesn't work for them. Or if it's my husband, I might say, I'm feeling really stuck. I've been working a lot and taking care of a lot, and I need a break. I need some fun. Could we do something together for fun? You see, that need has nothing to do with him not acting in a way I need. It's just an offer. And he might say that he can't. And then it's up to me to either find someone else to have fun with, or have some fun on my own, or communicate if I do need something more from him. Fun and playfulness is a human need. But sometimes our needs are triggered by something happening that doesn't feel good. Someone else's behavior is directly impacting us, and we need the relationship or the moment to shift somehow. And it's okay if this need is based in past pain that isn't healed, because relationships are where we do a lot of our healing, because we build safety in them, and they can be different than past relationships that didn't meet our needs. So if I struggle because of my core wound when I'm not listened to, but my husband keeps interrupting me when we're having a discussion, there's this nonviolent communication model or formula that might help. You start with stating the behavior that's difficult for you, the one that's activating your trauma and your awareness of your need. But instead of saying, you bozo, I hate it when you interrupt me. You're always doing it, and I've told you it hurts my feelings, and you never care how I feel. Instead, we use something like the word when, and we relate the facts of their behavior, what they did, without assigning a motive or judgment to it. No criticism. And then we follow it with how we feel relative to that behavior. And we say what we might need, and we make a suggestion for how to get that need met. And then the reciprocal part of this is that the other person would get to say their side and maybe agree to that suggestion or make a different one. So if I was to talk to my husband in that situation, I might say, I notice something's going on in me as we're talking, that when you interrupt me, I feel like I'm not being listened to, and that brings up all the pain from when I wasn't heard and didn't get to speak when I was young. Because I need to feel heard, I wonder if moving forward, you could let me finish my thought, and I'll make sure to give lots of space for you to finish your thought too. And you see, I listed the behavior, which is when you interrupt me. And I didn't assign a judgment to it. I didn't say, when you interrupted me, like you always do, that I've asked you not to do. I just let it be. When you interrupt me, I feel. And then I explain the feeling that's coming up. And I explained where it was related to the fact that it came from earlier in my life. You don't have to do that part, but you can, because it's sharing a story. It's sharing the story of what's happening inside of you. And that helps people to empathize and connect to your experience, right? And then I stated the need, because I need to feel heard. And then I made the suggestion that if he would help me meet my need by listening fully, that I would also listen fully to him. And then a great next step would be to ask, does that make sense? Do you feel like that's something you could do? Do you want to share what's going on for you and offer a connective opportunity back? Do you see how it's based on what you feel and what you need, not based on what he did that you're reacting to? Can you see how if you approach talking about it in this way, it's a way that offers understanding to you both and a way through with a suggestion of what might work. And then the chances that somebody can receive in their heart what you're saying are so much higher, because nothing violent happened in that communication, nothing that severed the relationship or that moment, nothing that naturally shut the other person down. And if the other person does react to that, they might need some time and a way to figure out what they need and how to express that. As a caveat, if you're in a relationship where someone will never hear what you need without a reaction, it might be good to go to therapy as a couple or reconsider that relationship based on what your needs are saying to you about how you and that person relate to each other. We can see how this kind of communication might be needed in friendships where it's easy to slip into behaviors that don't work for the other person because we're just being ourselves, right? But in friendships, it's like there's not as much structure as there is in a marriage or a work relationship. And people are so afraid of hurting others or being rejected by friends that they kind of just live with behaviors that aren't working for them until the relationship falls apart. But if you can talk this way and mention what you need without high emotionality because you've let it build up or without accusing someone, it gives room for that relationship to grow and have more intimacy and better communication. And one more thing I'd like to say is that when you're new to expressing needs, it will bring up a lot of fear, a lot of shakiness, a lot of vulnerability. And so I suggest you start with the safest relationships you have. For me, this is like my husband and my kids. And I do this with my kids too. It's not a big deal to me if my kids interrupt these days, but sometimes it is. And I can just pause and with graciousness say, hey, when you interrupt, I feel like I'm really not being heard and it's really important to me to be heard. Could you just let me finish this thought? And sometimes the person is not willing to do that, and we have to negotiate a little bit to figure out how we can both get our needs met so that the relationship has the flow and connection we need, right? So even though we have a need, sometimes it takes a bit of work to find a way that both people can have their needs met. And this is all just practice that we get to do for the rest of our lives. There's no pressure and no judgment on how this process goes. Before we end, I want to ask if we could identify some of your needs. I want to read a list of needs from a needs inventory published by Center for Nonviolent Communication, and I'll link this in the podcast notes. They also have a feelings inventory, and this can be useful when you aren't quite sure what you're feeling. You can read through the list of feeling words and circle the ones that stand out as matching what you feel. And then you go to the needs inventory and circle the words for needs that feel like they might be related to those feelings. This can help you know what you need and how to begin asking for any support. As I read through these need words, just notice, does your body respond to any of them? Is there a part of you that leaps forward toward the word that feels really resonant with that word, or wants to cry, or just reacts to any of these words? Under need words that express a need for connection, we have the need for acceptance, affection, appreciation, belonging, cooperation, communication, closeness, community, compassion, consideration, consistency, empathy, inclusion, intimacy, love, mutuality, nurturing, respect or self-respect, safety, security, stability, support, to know and be known, to see and be seen, to understand and be understood, or the need for trust and warmth. Under needs for play, we have joy and humor. Under physical well-being, we need air, food, water, rest or sleep, movement or exercise, touch, sexual expression, safety, shelter, Under honesty, we have a need for authenticity, to be seen as ourselves, to express who we really are. Integrity, presence. We have a need for peace, which may look like a need for beauty, communion, ease, equality, harmony, inspiration, or order. We have a need for autonomy, for choice, freedom, independence, space, spontaneity. And we have needs for meaning, awareness, celebration of life, challenge, clarity, competence, consciousness, contribution, creativity, discovery, efficacy, effectiveness, growth, hope, learning, grieving, participation, purpose, self-expression, and understanding. How do you feel? What words stood out to you? What in you is crying, a need that wants to be met? And could you picture a world in which that part is satisfied and has what it needs? How would you go about meeting that need? What actions would be necessary? If there were many of them that pulled at you, today might be a good time to make a little list of some things that you might be needing. And I know a lot of us have little support, relationships that aren't working well, lots of stressors, physical needs, and lack of resources. Yet, some of these needs can be met with just small tweaks. 10 minutes a day, unnegotiable. To read a book to meet the need for pleasure or mental stimulation. 15 minutes earlier to bed to meet the need for rest. You won't regret it. Or maybe it's one hard conversation where you shake in your boots from the fear of being so vulnerable, but you work up the courage to ask for one thing you need, and you can't believe how willing and happy that person is to help you feel seen, loved, heard, appreciated, or whatever else. What do you need? And how can that need be met? Only you can know. Please note that the needs inventory listed in this episode and linked below is offered for free from the Center for Nonviolent Communication. It can be used by anybody as long as they credit the center for its authorship. And please do make use of that resource in your life. I use it myself. I give it out to clients regularly, and people are often shocked at how simple that the feelings and needs lists are, how they go together, and how they help them communicate things they've never been able to do before. I appreciate your time in listening to this episode. If you have questions or thoughts to share, please comment on YouTube or send me a DM on Instagram, because I love to hear what you think. And I'll see you next week when we go a little deeper again.